But last night back at the hotel, I slept without any medication. I slept without any food. We slept in different beds, which we normally don't do, because Linda felt like that I was just supposed to move around, because the only place I could sleep was on my back in a fetal position. And I tossed and turned, not bad, I'm talking about good. I mean, I moved in a way that I hadn't moved in so long. And didn't get to sleep long, about 6 hours, because we stayed up talking about the Lord and all of that. But I'm telling you, man, thank you, Larry, for obeying the Lord. Thank you for Jay for creating an atmosphere in a place. I mean, who would ever think that God would show up in a place like Jesse, West Virginia? Amen. I want to start by letting you see a clip, and it kind of gives you a little bit of an idea of what God did in my hometown. And I'm going to tell you a story because we're eyewitnesses of a profound move of God. Not because of us, but almost in spite of us. And let me say this first. I was thinking a while ago that if it was really, if somehow tomorrow in America there are churches that people got the revelation that it's all about Jesus. I mean, if it really was, what a change there would be in our nation overnight. Wouldn't it be amazing if we could see that happen? All right, guys, you can do the clip.
Why did it start here? I've asked myself that many times. Why here?
Everything, it was crashing, you know, you would hear awful stories.
I mean, we had no hope. There was nothing we could do. It was at the end.
We're living in hell.
People got tired of burying the kids.
We can't go get those people back. They're gone.
It just finally got to the boiling point where people just absolutely said, it's enough.
We have got to take our community back.
They began to pray for a solution, and they started taking action.
You can't put it in words what it was like, just knowing that something's getting ready to happen.
What's happening is a story. What's happening has never happened before.
We could talk about it for days and days and can't really get across what all's happened here.
We're part of something that's bigger than us, and that's something that's going to change everything. This could change the whole country.
I need to spend a few minutes and tell you some things, and so you'll understand understand more about what I've got to share later. Clay County, Kentucky, Manchester, about 2,200 people in the town, about 21,000 in the county. We're in the heart of the Daniel Boone National Forest. That sounds beautiful, and it is, but it was a cover for some incredibly horrible things. History of feuds, poverty, addiction. If you could do it bad, we did it. The History Channel did a documentary called The 100 Years' War in Clay County, Kentucky. The 1937 Louisville Courier-Journal newspaper had a picture of downtown Manchester on the front page, and it said the title was "The Most Corrupt Small City in America." And that was the life that we led for over 200 years. And I grew up there. That was my home, and it was, everybody knew it was bad, but it was like we put blinders on because we didn't think anything could ever happen. In the late 1999, 2000, Oxycontin. You remember when Oxycontin, it just became a blight, especially Appalachia. And by 2003, people were dying. And our children began to die. At one point, we were losing one high school student. Now, we're talking about a high school with 1,000 kids. And we were losing one a week to an Oxycontin overdose. And guys, as bad as the drug thing is with addicts, it's a lot worse for the family members. It is, because they're not addicted, and they're living the reality of this 24/7. And it was just horrible. And then good people were leaving because they didn't want that to happen to their kids. So we were just in such a mess. I pastored my church for 25 years, and so I love the church, and I'm going to say maybe some harsh things that some people don't understand, but I'm telling you, I'm a church man. I love the church. But for the first time after our kids began to die, the pastors began to come together to pray. And what I loved about it, it was the Baptists and the Methodists and the Presbyterians. And I call them charismaniacs because that's what I am. And the Pentecostals and the non-denominationals. We began to come together on Saturday morning to pray. And it started out with pastors, and then people began to call, and they'd say, we've been praying for several years, and Clay County's a big county with not too many people because the forest is so big. And they'd say, we've been praying for years, and could we come and pray with you? And obviously they could. And on Saturday mornings at 8:30, we began together. And listen, guys, I love my hometown. And I love the full gospel. I love all of that thing that represents. But on Saturday morning, we would have Presbyterians and Methodists on their knees at the altar crying out to God. And in some ways made us Pentecostals look pretty pathetic. Yeah. I'm just telling you, because they were hurting just like we were hurting. True. And all of a sudden, in that tragedy, in that lifestyle that we were all a part of, we began to come together. We began to come together, and a Southern Baptist pastor, we call him Ken the Baptist. Ken had a dream. And if he was here today, we travel a lot together. If he was here today, he'd say, you know, Southern Baptists are not supposed to dream. That's you Pentecostal guys. And if you think about it, that's kind of what we've done. But God began to use, He just had everything orchestrated. We didn't know hardly anything. People started calling us and say, how do you train your intercessors? And we said, well, we're not training anybody. We're not. We'd like to know more, but we're just trying to. Sometimes we felt like we had a tiger by the tail. But we were praying and seeking the Lord. And sometimes the meetings were so intense, and sometimes we'd have a bad week. And I don't know how many of you have seen some of the transformation videos. Of course, Appalachian Dawn's one of them now, but they've got Appalachian 1 and 2, which I've got in the back, and I'm not trying to sell you stuff. I'm just trying to give you something that'll help you. We would pop in one of those short DVDs, and while it was playing, somebody would jump up and say, Lord, if you did that in Guatemala, or if you did that in Kenya, Africa, you can do it in Manchester, Kentucky. And it was all based on prayer. It's what happens when people begin to pray, and that's my message today. See, desperation leads to desperate prayer, and desperate prayer leads to desperate action. And sometimes, as praying folks, worshipers, we're kind of on everybody else because they're not worshiping like we are. But then sometimes we're sitting around and really not doing anything. And then the folks over here that's the doers, they're looking at the intercessors and saying, all they want to do is pray. But you understand that we all need each other. There's different parts of the body of Christ doing different things. So this is what happened is going to be short because I've got other things to say. But on Sunday afternoon, May the 2nd, 2004, in a rainstorm, we woke up that morning and at my church we had on the big screen we had the weather map, and it was green from Arkansas and all Missouri, and they're all the way over to the Atlantic Ocean. It just rained in every place, and it was cool for May. And we had prayed so hard about everything, and I just thought, Lord, nobody's going to show up. I mean, it's raining. But we got to the big road. Let me tell you this. You all appreciate this. We have one 4-lane road that runs through town, and we call that the big road. And we're pretty proud of the big road. And but we got out on the big road, and people began to come. The rain let up a little bit, but it never really stopped raining. And remember what I told you, the size of our town, boys. 63 churches, 63 pastors, and nearly 4,000 people marched through our city for the glory of God. Now, why did we do that? Because we were desperate. You understand what I'm telling you? It's not because we were brave or we were trying to make a point to anybody or run people out of town. It was because we were desperate for God to do something. We get to the park on the other end of town. 63 pastors are standing up in front of everybody, and all the people were there. And the pastors began to repent. We read a proclamation. And in that proclamation, we repented as pastors for being more concerned about our denomination, about our buildings, our programs, and all the stuff that we do in church. It's really not worth a whole lot. And as we began to repent, the manifest presence of God came into the park. And it wasn't one of those things like us Pentecostals like sometimes are running and jumping and hooping and hollering. And I love that, okay? I'm all in on that. But it was like you couldn't breathe. The manifest presence of God was so strong that people didn't know what. I've been in the presence a lot. A lot of our people had never really been in the presence of the Lord. And you really didn't know what to do. And that moment changed us. I think most of us forever that was there. You can hardly talk to anybody that was there that day that start talking about it that don't start crying. Because it impacted us in such a great way. We weren't ready for that. We didn't know what that was all about. One of the things that happened, and I'll talk about in a minute, the fear of the Lord came into our city that night. And it didn't just touch the church, honey, it touched the bad guys. And for the first time, drug dealers and corrupt politicians began to turn names into the FBI so they could cut a deal. Because they were afraid of God and what He was doing. We had a little Methodist pastor, looked like Mr. Rogers. I tell about him on the DVD. All he needed was a sweater and a song. Listen, such a wonderful, wonderful brother. He talked so low and he was so humble, and he just looked really good. Little thin guy. He came in one Saturday morning. He looked like he'd been run over by a truck. His shirt was unbuttoned. His hair was a mess. And he said, "I've got to say something." And he said, "I've been up all night praying. And God said that this morning we need to pray for God to expose the rest of the darkness in our city and our county." And within 18 months, there had been over 60 major arrests by the FBI. Corrupt politicians, major drug dealers. It wiped our city and county out because almost everybody was corrupt because the church didn't vote because they took drug money and bought the election. So what we do as Christians, we really did the right thing. We just dropped out. We did nothing. We grumbled and complained. That's what we did, Jay. But God came. But I want to tell you something. As bad as the darkness was, as dark as it was, that wasn't our problem. The problem was the lack of the light coming from the believers not doing anything. Just sitting back and allowing the enemy to take over our city and our county. And we justify it. Well, there's nothing we can do. My mother said, Doug, said, you're a pastor. You got no business coming against drug dealers. We'll have to have a funeral for you. They'll kill you. And Linda would always deal with my mother for it. And listen, it was just amazing what happened. So, let me just share this real quick, and I can't go into any stories, but let me tell you this. After the presence of the Lord came, before it was like, you ever been swimming and you get really, really tired, it's like you're going no place. That's kind of what it was like in Manchester for the believers. After God showed up, it was like, the best I can describe it is like floating, putting your hands behind your head and going downstream and just enjoying yourself. Because why? Because God changed the atmosphere that day in our city. The day after the march, we went to see every public official. We divided up as 3 and 4 as pastors. And here's what we did. We didn't understand the impact of this. We were just following the Holy Spirit. And the Lord told us to go ask them to forgive us. And I'm thinking, that don't make a whole lot of sense. But we asked them to forgive us for grumbling and complaining and not being a help to the sheriff or to the whoever that we went to see. And you have to understand they were all corrupt. We found out later some of those guys got saved because they said they couldn't believe that the church would ask them for forgiveness. Wow. Listen, when you hear from God, guys, it's just sometimes it don't make any sense, but it needs to be done, whatever He tells you to do. Amen? So, obviously, lots of people went to prison. Our schools began to improve. They began to honor the Lord. Now, you know about the See You Around the Pole? They did that at Clay County High School every day. All the elementary schools, the middle school, the high school had praise and worship for 15 or 20 minutes every school day morning, and a student would pray. They began to teach the Bible in the public schools, and it's available today. And the reason a lot of communities don't do it, they're more afraid of the ACLU than they are about what the Lord wants to happen. It's called the Bible and its effect on the culture. Perfectly legal. We started doing that, and there were many kids signed up to do that they had to promise them before they graduated they would get them in a class, but they could not accommodate the kids that wanted to take that class. It's amazing. In 2006, we had an election. And we really prayed about our election. At my church, all the pastors wanted to have this thing called Promote the Vote. At my church, I found out later, they told some people they thought maybe a fight would break out or they'd bomb the building. They'd rather it be my church than theirs. But listen, we had 3,000 people, more people voted in that election than had ever voted before. Wow. And everybody elected was a believer in Christ. And we went from nobody being a believer to everybody was a believer. And guys, what I'm talking about, what happens is when you pray and hear from God and you begin to act on what He's saying. Yeah. This is all about the Lord. This is not about personalities. We really didn't know anything. We really didn't. So, the election, the first order of business, we had a 35-year-old woman that had just gotten saved. She defeated a guy that had been the mayor for over 30 years. It was a pedophile.
Oh.
And he drove a church bus. And we weren't happy about Carmen running because we didn't think she could possibly win. She won by 135 votes. And that was in November of 2006. In January of 2007, when they swore her in, she read a proclamation from the city council that Manchester would no longer be just Manchester. It would be Manchester, City of Hope. That's the name of that town. And she also said, we're going to begin starting next Monday morning, said we will be praying at City Hall every Monday morning. Said I'll have all the employees of the city there and you pastors need to bring the church in. The county, not to be outdone, the county judge executive, which actually, I don't know why they call him a judge, he actually runs the county. To keep from being outdone, he started having a Thursday noon prayer meeting. the school system began to have a prayer meeting at the Board of Education, and then for years and years, right before school started, they would invite the pastors and anybody that wanted to come and walk around the churches. A custodian would let us walk around the schools. The custodian would let us in, and what he wanted to have happen is us take anointing oil and anoint every locker and every seat and the gymnasium and the auditorium and the band room and all of that and the teacher's desk and ask God to come that school year. And let me say one more thing about the schools. Our high school graduations wound up being, now remember these are public schools, okay, not private schools. At the high school graduations, the salutatorian and the valedictorian basically gave their testimonies, and the band and the choir did praise and worship music, Jack. And one year, the student body president got kind of fired up, and he gave an invitation, and some parents got saved. But what I'm talking about is God coming to a place when you invite Him. Our economy, we were the 5th poorest county in America. Now we're still a really poor county, as much of Appalachia. But God did some things, and things were better, and people began to move back home. And all of a sudden, people that had lived in Ohio and Michigan and Indiana for years working would retire, and then they would come and downsize and build little A-frame houses and stuff back in Manchester. And let me tell you this, that's getting ready. It's happening a little bit now. As time gets worse and worse in the coming days, we're going to see a flood of those people coming back to the Appalachian Mountains. I write it down. It's going to happen. I know what's going to happen. We needed rehab. We had I can't tell you how many drug addicts we had. They called our church the rehab church because we didn't know much what to do with them, but we loved them and we welcomed them. And let me tell you, don't be telling drug addicts what they need to do, and they need to know how much you care about them before you do any ministry to them. So we needed rehab. So we had a brilliant idea. We were raising $50,000 and we were buying FEMA trailers. And we were going to, I think, put duct tape around. I don't know what we were going to do. We hadn't got that far. And our Congressman, Hal Rogers, in the 5th Congressional District began to really fight the drug issue. And he asked the churches for help. And people said, oh, Doug, you can't work with the government. We call it the Dream Team, because they embraced us and we embraced them. And the congressman's office called one day, and this is my life story before I get into what I've really come to tell you. Got a call from the congressman's office one day that said the congressman wants to come to Manchester and meet with some of the key people that's been a part of this movement and partner up and see what else we can do. And the night before he came, and that's a pretty big deal in a little town for the congressman that's been in office for 30-something years. The night before he came, I was praying. The Lord said, do not ask him for anything. And I almost did one of those get thee behind me sayings. And I called Ken the Baptist. And I said, Ken, I believe the Lord said this. And he said, are you sure? And I said, yeah. And he said, well, we're not asking for nothing. The congressman comes and we have lunch, we have a great meeting, and he's talking about all the issues that are going on, and he thanked us for being. They thought that Clay County would be the problem county in the 30 counties of eastern Kentucky. But in fact, because God showed up, we were the leaders. Go figure. And so we talked about that, and then towards the end he said, now, what can I do for you guys to help you? And I said, Congressman, listen, we really appreciate the fact that you're working with us, that you've given the church a chance to show what we can do. And we're not asking for anything. We're just very happy to be able to serve with you and do what your people are trying to do to help us. And he said, are you sure? And we said, yeah. So they leave. 2 hours later, his chief of staff called and he said, Doug, the congressman said that's the best meeting he's ever been in 30-something years in Washington. Now, he's got the same question, what do you want? And I said, Bob, we've got the same answer. We don't want anything. Couple of months go by, and I remember we're trying to raise $50,000. His chief of staff from Washington called, and he said, we're building 2 rehabilitation centers in eastern Kentucky. One's going to be in Pikeville, and he was honest. He said, and they're Democratic, and we're hoping to get some Republican votes out of that. He said, but you guys get the other one. And I said, Will, I said, that's great, but I said, we don't think any of that works, the stuff from the government. And I said, we've got our heart set on Christ-centered recovery. And he said, Doug, I think that's going to be a problem. I said, Will, I understand that, but thank the congressman, thank him just for thinking about us. Listen, another month goes by, Will calls. He said, Doug, are you sitting down? And I said, no. And he said, well, you might ought to sit down on this one. He said, you got it? And I said, what did I get? He said, let me read from the charter of the Department of Health and Human Services. He said, you've been granted $1.5 million for a Christ-centered rehab program.
Hallelujah. Thank you, Lord.
Now, listen, I want you to keep in mind, we didn't beg the congressman for anything. The Lord told us not to ask for anything because He wanted us to understand that we were to trust Him, not man.
There you go. Come on. There you go.
And listen, at the groundbreaking, and in the meantime, a businessman that his son died from an overdose, he gave us 80 acres of land on top of the mountain to build it. And it's called Chad's Hope, and it's one of the most effective residential centers in all of America. And I mean, it's just an amazing place. And it's people come from all over the country. They stay 9 to 12 months. And then the Clay County people embrace them, and most of them stay because it's real hard for a drug addict to go back home. It's just hard. So at the groundbreaking, there's a man comes from the Department of Justice. Now I want you to think about this. He looks a really nice man. He looks around the hills, and he said, I guess I'm far enough from Washington to tell you this, that no real rehabilitation other than Christ-centered really works anywhere in America. And I'm thinking, you guys are spending billions of dollars doing stuff you don't even think works. And could you trust the church?
Hello.
Could you just give us a chance? Hello. So we built, and at that meeting, the state of Kentucky, the president of the Kentucky State Senate is from Manchester, and he had really fought us hard because he was a high-powered lawyer, and he defended a lot of drug dealers. But he shows up with one of those big checks, you know, about this tall and that wide, for $750,000 from the state of Kentucky. So we wind up building a $2.5 million facility. We tried to run it ourselves for a year, and it just killed us. 24/7, not really knowing what you're doing. So we were already working with Teen Challenge, doing some outpatient stuff. And we asked them if they would like to take it over. We gave them a 3-year lease, and after 3 years, we gave them a 99-year lease to do whatever they wanted to do. And they call it the Taj Mahal because it's about a $3 million property that nobody asked for. It's incredible that God is doing amazing things in that center.
Amen.
And they're